Hello and welcome to episode 242 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. As everybody knows out there, 242 is a multiple of 139, and therefore it is just the two of us.
Everyone knows that.
That's right.
I mean, also, you take 2, you multiply by 2, you get 4, then you divide it by 2, you get back to 2, so 242, there's a lot of 2s in there.
That's true.
Why is our 2 significant this episode, Mark?
For a number of reasons. First of all, it's just the two of us. It's just the good old green and orange tanks.
The 2 of us.
All right, I thought you were going to sing the Will Smith song.
You can make it if you try.
There you go. But in addition to just having the two of us on the show, it is also a show that we're going to be talking about second chances. So second, two equals second chances. And we're going to be talking about games that we think that we might want to give a second chance to. Maybe we've played it a couple times in the past and don't really think it's for us, but there's this lingering thing in the back of our minds. Maybe I should try it. Maybe it was bad circumstance. Maybe I just need to get sort of the hang of it. Now that I know the rules, I'll be able to hit the ground running. Something about it is just making us think we shouldn't necessarily turn our back on it just quite yet. We want to give it another go. So we'll be doing that in the main part of the show. But before we do that, we're going to be talking about the games we've played at Strategicon this weekend, which is the local Los Angeles convention. And there we played Mille Fiori. I got a chance to finally try it out after Neelan and Kellen had given it a go. We played Rise of the Metro, which was a completely new game to both of us. That was introduced to us by listeners Camden, who is second of the new on our Discord, and Jeff, who goes by Duck on our Discord. So thanks to those guys for playing with us, and to Camden for introducing Rise of the Metro to us. And finally, Turing Machine, which is another game I didn't get a chance to play, but Neelan was kind enough to let me have a spin on it. So let's start off with Mille Fiori.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Mark, we had already all played this without you, sadly, but...
The worst way to play games. The worst way to play.
Yeah, it's a Knizia game, and it's a really, really good one, is my estimation of it, so I was excited to show this to you. I'm not going to go into all the full details of it. I guess in summary, this is a game where it's effectively a drafting turn. You're drafting for actions to place a piece onto one of multiple mini-games, and each of the mini-games are very interactive and give you a lot of points. Mr. Delicious, Mr. Mike Delisio, often calls this Ganshon Knizia, and I think that's a pretty apt description, which is to say it's about games bouncing off of games, tracks bouncing off of tracks, getting bonus actions, doing a lot of things in quick succession to like maximize your potential point gains. What was your take on Mille Fiori based on your first play, Mark?
Yeah, I think this is a great episode to talk about my first play Mille Fiori on, because I want to give this game a second go. I didn't dislike my first play of it, but I did not completely grok all the ways that scoring works. You know, as Neelan has described here and on a previous episode, it's sort of like a bunch of mini games going on all around the board, and the way you play each mini game is pretty straightforward. You just play a card and put a piece down, and that activates things. But the sort of nuances of each section, even though they're not super complicated, I just didn't have a firm grasp of. And so, you know, I would do something and score a couple points, and then Neelan would do something frequently in the game, which would bounce one thing off of another thing off of another thing off another thing off. And like my goal by the end of the game, my like stated goal at the table was I just don't want to be lapped twice by Neelan. like at the end, my struggle was to just creep ahead of him, so I barely wasn't lapped twice. I think my final score was 141 and his was like 340, so I barely missed a double lapping by Neelan.
Yeah, it definitely felt pretty brutal, and that happened, I would say fairly early in the game, where I just had this very healthy lead.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think to some extent, like, that's what the game is, right?
Yes.
Like, if you're able to combo those actions very effectively, the point gains are immense.
And I'm glad that you crushed, because I don't necessarily mind games where the scores are close, and we're going to be talking about one of those later in the episode, but I do also appreciate games where a player who's better just destroys, because it makes me think, okay, you know, expertise or good play is rewarded, and often I like those types of games. So didn't mind, and it made for a fun goal to just try to avoid being lapped the third time or the second time by Neelan. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I think it's also a game where being crushed isn't super frustrating, because it's such a simple game. It's such a straightforward game. There's not like I've got to remember all these rules, and so I'm never going to catch up with somebody who's really good. It was just a matter of me like missing some ways that scoring chained, and that would be easy enough to remember and pick up for a second or a third play. So,
and also, to be clear, not to bring down my intense strategic ability at this game. But you know, card drafting is fallible in some ways, which is to say that you can get opening hands that are really strong, and then you don't get anything for the round that really works together based on the previous cards you played. So it's just light enough, and you just can't take it that seriously enough, but it still feels so fun to play, is kind of always my reaction to it.
Yeah, and in addition to the lightness and to the quickness of it that mitigates that opening bad hand that you might get, the fact that it is a drafting game where, you know, if you get a terrible hand, chances are you're passing most of that terrible hand to the next player. Like, it may work better for them, sure, but just because you get stuck with a really great hand or a really bad hand doesn't mean you're going to have that for the rest of the round. So there's some mitigation there, but I take your point. But yeah, Mille Fiori, I may have cooled on it just a bit in that first play because I was hoping for something like amazing, and it very well may be amazing. I just definitely want to play it again before grabbing it. But yeah, I enjoyed our first play of it.
So yeah, the next game that we wanted to talk about is Rise of the Metro. So, you know, Mark already mentioned that this was kindly taught to us by a friend of the podcast, Second of the New, in our Discord. So Rise of the Metro is, and you know, it does feel a pity that we don't have our resident Japanese game expert on the show to talk about this. This is from a small Japanese publisher called Nanowari by designers Aiko Oyama and Toru Oyama, who may or may not be related.
Also the artist in this game, apparently. So.
Oh, yeah. There's another artist credited, Urabe Rasunate, but they are also, both Oyamas are credited as artists on this. It is a fairly simple game to explain. I think it's somewhat abstract in its design. The premise is that you are growing out subway, metro lines in an unspecified city in Japan, I suppose.
Yeah.
You have colored sticks which represent the connections between nodes on this map. So the map is sort of preceded with a grid of nodes connected by dotted lines. There are some gaps in the map that sort of create like barriers that you have to sort of move around effectively. But otherwise, every single node can be connected to any other node by one of these colored sticks. And on your turn, it's as simple as placing one of these sticks and scoring whenever your line connects to a station that it hasn't before. There are a lot of little twists to this, right? The base score for any given station is 1, but the score for that station becomes 2 if multiple players have a line that connects to that station. So there becomes this shared incentive that starts to build into it. Okay, if Mark connects to the station, Mark scores 1 point. But if Neelan connects to the station, Mark gets another point because now there are 2 lines connecting to it, but I get 2 points. So that, you know, that is a slightly better move for me than it is to Mark. And that shared incentive gets better and better for other players because as soon as you start to connect to these stations, they suddenly become worth 3 points or 4 points. The twist to some of the placement of this, though, there's a base game and a variant that we played, and I'm going to only describe the base game here. You are only connecting paths at the ends of your lines. It's a strictly linear route across the map. It can't double back on itself. It can't branch off in any ways. And even more restrictive than that, no 2 stations can be connected by multiple lines, no matter what their route is. So if there's station A over here and station B over here, and Mark has a straight line between those maps by 1 line, I can't make any other route that directly connects those 2 stations. And this becomes like a very hard limiting factor where you start to realize, oh, there's nowhere that my line can go because the only way past this section is to hit a station that I literally am not able to connect to. So you can easily build yourself into corners, and this is kind of where it starts to feel very like a sort of puzzly spatial abstract, optimizing your route across the city based on the timing that these stations pop up. Do I think I can get to the station with my line before Mark gets there with his line? Like, those sorts of considerations become super important, as well as trying to optimize your route through the most valuable stations. Very simple game. That's kind of really all there is to it. You're accumulating points as you connect up to these stations, and once everyone has placed all of their lines, the game is over and whoever has the highest score wins. Mark, what was your take on Rise of the Metro?
Yeah, this is also a relatively quick game because you'll start with a number of sticks which represent your route. I think it's something like 15 or something like that. And you just go around till everybody's placed all their sticks out, and that's the end of the game. I think our games were about 30 minutes, so also a fast-moving game. We actually tried it twice in just quick succession. It's funny, this was a game, unlike Mille Fiori, where the scores are, you know, naturally going to stay tight because of the way that you sort of score off of other people's stations. I had never heard of this game, didn't know a thing about it, and ended up liking it quite a bit. I feel like this game sort of, again, opposite of Mille Fiori, where Mille Fiori, my first play wasn't super great, but I'm eager to play it again. I'm also eager to play Rise of the Metro again, but I feel like I might be at my peak now because it feels like a game where maybe repeated plays, things are less, I don't know, less exciting or something about it. Because I found a lot of joy in sort of trying to figure out how to differentiate myself in a game where so much of the scoring is shared, because like whenever you score, you're either scoring from a place where somebody else has scored and they're going to be bumped up as well, or you're scoring something where somebody else is going to add to it and you're both going to rise. So it's very tough to get just a single point, eke out a single point, eke out one little advantage here or there. And so my lack of grasp of the strategy felt like part of the enjoyment, part of the excitement I had for it. It may be something where that just, grows and grows once I get the subtlety of it, because I don't think any of us sort of got the nuances of how to play it. But I really liked it. This was a really nice surprise. A game that is sort of difficult to teach in that whole, you can't reconnect the station thing. That was something even I didn't grasp fully the entire game, because it's hard to sort of get your mind around that, at least for me. But relatively straightforward in terms of like a very simple rule set, if a little confusing, and quick to play. So, a game that I would be interested in getting and, introducing to people who maybe are looking for quick, though meaty, brain burnery strategy games. It was a nice fit in that sort of niche.
Yeah, it's interesting. My take is not that dissimilar from yours, but I think I'm more convinced that I don't necessarily have much more to gain from Rise of the Metro, which is to say that I really loved our couple of plays with it. Like, I think that you're exactly right in that the joy of the game was sort of each of us collectively figuring out our way through it, because even just realizing, for instance, that, oh wait, no, I've started a line that I literally can't go anywhere with. Like, you felt like something had happened in the middle of our first game, and then, you don't make that mistake on your second game. But I also think that the ceiling on that is fairly low.
Yeah, that's my concern,
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know that it would necessarily bear similar fruit in subsequent plays. That said, it's hard to argue with just the simplicity of the design. And also wonderfully rendered. Like, I have issues with the production. I think actually it's pretty hard to see the actual network of routes because it's overlaid on like a map of the city. But yeah, it ends up looking like this. I remember feeling similarly when we played Key to the City of London. It starts to just look like a subway map, but very, very specifically at the end of it, it's just a white board almost that's just covered with these little networks of colored lines in a way that's quite visually appealing. But yeah, that is Rise of the Metro by Nanowari.
So though I wasn't able to make it to Gen Con, as I mentioned, I was fortunate enough to play one of the hottest games of the show, Turing Machine by Fabian Frieden, Johan Levitt, and Scorpion Mask Games via Nealon's copy with the aforementioned Second Avenue and Duck from our Discord at Strategicon. For those who don't know anything about it, right off the bat, I think the game that is most similar to Turing Machine in many ways is Decrypto. Decrypto is also a Scorpion Mask game and also a deduction game. But even more than that, they both share this very clean, very white and bright aesthetic style, and are also both fairly straightforward games that are difficult to, I think, explain and teach, I think, until you've played a turn or two, and then they just sort of make sense. With that proviso, let me try to explain Turing Machine. So your goal is to figure out a 3-digit code, with each digit ranging from 1 to 5 before any of your opponents do. The way you do this is by running a number through a set of computers, quote-unquote computers, which are basically logic tests, and trying to deduce what that means about the computers themselves, about your guess, and obviously about what the target number might be. That sounds quite complicated, and this game does pack a lot of brain burning in a 15 to 20 minute experience, but the game isn't as confusing to play as it might sound a la Decrypto. The way it works is that you'll take cards numbered 1 to 5 to guess a number. There's a 1 to 5 set in blue with the number in the first position of the 3-digit code, a set with the number in yellow, which is in the middle position of the 3-digit code, and a set that are purple in the last position of the 3-digit code. So if I wanted to try code number 235, I would take a blue 2, a yellow 3, and a purple 5. These cards are all made to look like punch cards so that there are a bunch of holes throughout the cards. But when you stack the cards together, there will be a single hole that emerges through all three of them. So one hole that emerges throughout all three cards. Then you'll choose up to 3 logic tests in front of you to try against your number. So for example, there might be a machine that says your number has 0 threes, your number has 1 3, your number has 2 threes, or your number has 3 threes. So the machine will account for all possibilities given the variable that it's testing for. So in that example, if I wanted to test my number, I would put the 3 stacked punch cards aligned with the solution key of the computer card, quote unquote computer card, and see either an X mark or a check. If I see an X, then I know that the machine is not checking for a number with a single 3. So that tells me that the target number must either have 0, 2, or 3 threes. If it comes back with a check, then I know that my number only has 1 3. You can run up to 3 of these tests on 3 different, again, quote unquote, computers per round, trying to deduce what they mean about the number you're trying to guess, about the computers themselves. And then, if you want, you can announce at the end of that testing phase that you'd like to guess the target number. Often everyone is going to pass and you're going to play another round of testing. But if you want to try and you end up missing it, as I did in our game, you're immediately eliminated. If you get it right, you win. Although if you get it right when others get it right, there's a tie, and then the winner is whoever ran the fewest number of tests against the machines. That may all sound complicated, and as I said, it does take a first round to start to try to get it. Although much like the crypto, which at this point I think Kellen teaches by saying, we're going to play a round of this. You won't understand it when we start, but you will by the end. I think that's sort of a good way to just get going in Turing after getting a rules overview. All that said, I think it's absolutely worth it. This immediately after we played it went on my want and trade list. I like deduction in general, so I'm predisposed to like it anyway. But the way it's done in Turing Machine is just so clever with the multiple punch cards. I also really like the way that the logic is doled out via the machines. It's not just a, yes, it's true, no, it's not. You sort of have to deduce what that means about the machines themselves. I just thought it was really, really clever. I think deduction games can sometimes burn bright and then sort of you're done with them, and that might be the case with Turing Machine. But I think the novelty and just the cleverness of it, for me, feels like it might carry it a little further than most other deduction machines. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think there are a few things that are both like equally charming and absurd about Turing Machine. And one of the things is exactly that punch card system you just described. Like when you show someone this and you show them these cards are these mess of holes, it's like, oh wait, if you overlay them in just this way, then you get this stacked punch card that only hides a single thing, and then you align it with this ridiculous grid, and then you're going to get there's this like component to that where it's like, it's just the fact that they've worked out the production of all of this to just work in this very, very precise way does feel a little bit like magic. You know, it does feel like paper masquerading as machines, which is very much the intent of the design. But when you think about even a little bit about what you're doing, where half of the novelty is taking these cards and stacking them on top of each other and overlaying on them a thing, and that's just to tell you whether this cardboard machine in front of you thinks the number is, like, the whole thing has a level of absurd that is just kind of wild to me. Because the unsaid thing about all of this is that there is like 0 player interaction throughout this process. Like all of the stuff that is happening during this round is happening simultaneously, but it's you taking a card off of the table, testing it for yourself in private, scribbling behind your little private screen, making sure that nothing you do has any impact on any other player, and then just doing that all over again until you say, oh, I've either won or I haven't won. And it's like, I have no problem with that. I can imagine Kellen being in this, on this podcast right now, being like, this is like the furthest thing I want from a board game. And I would totally be with you if that was your perspective. I would totally understand. I loved it. It's just got that exact amount of just light bulbs going off in your head as you realize elements of the deduction. You feel smart once you've sort of narrowed things down in the exact right way. And it's not just a matter of trying stuff blindly and until stuff works. There are very specific numbers that you're like, oh, you know what? I know that if I test this number on these machines, I'm going to get 2 very important pieces of information out of that. And like those moments feel really good, especially when they pay off. So it smartly rewards that level of thinking in a way that I really, really loved.
Even when they don't pay off, because as I said, I got eliminated for taking the wrong guess, and I was just like poring over my notes to try to figure out what I got wrong. And I honestly had a lot of fun just like double checking things and trying to figure out where my flaw in the logic was. And I loved it even when I got eliminated, which is, for me, if I enjoy a game when I'm getting beat, as I did with Mille Fiori, it's to me the sign of a game that I'm interested in, that I like.
That's great. Something I guess that's also worth saying is, there are a couple of like, I guess, pre-printed scenarios in the box that like escalate in difficulty, but the game also provides an app that has like, theoretically millions of pre-computed puzzles for you, because it's effectively like a computer-aided design system, right? Where they could theoretically devise any number of puzzles that just interact with these punch cards in very specific ways. And I think that's really smart. It reminds me of like how Awkward Guests is just kind of this very clever combination of simple systems that like are infinitely reusable to some extent. That said, just to like cap off the Kellen that's not here's thoughts, if the idea of 5 people sitting at the table racing to solve a Sudoku sounds fun to you, then this might be the game to you.
Yes. Before we move on to our main topic, giving games a second chance, just another reminder that we are now just under a month away from Shucks 2022 in Vancouver, which is taking place September 30th through the 2nd of October. If you are at all interested, I would encourage you to go and check it out. This was a fantastic convention when we went to it a couple years ago before the pandemic. Vancouver, I thought, was a gorgeous, gorgeous city. I'm almost as excited to go to Vancouver again as I am to go to the convention. I just love the city itself. So a lot of reasons to go. Math trades, the Shucks math trade is going on right now, so you still have time to submit your games as I'm submitting mine. Just a lot of good things. We are going to be doing some talks at the show with some special guests that we're really excited about, so it should be a lot of fun. Shucks, very much like Dice Tower West, is a game playing centric convention, in my opinion, as opposed to conventions like Gen Con, which I also love, but seem to be more about, revealing the latest games and talking about what's coming out. Shucks and Dice Tower West seem very focused on game playing, so it's another thing I'm excited about, playing games with you all out there. So if you have any inclination, or if you're going, certainly join our Discord at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. Let us know you're going, because I really want to make that Chuck's channel that we're going to have. I guess it's already started, right? We already have a Chuck's channel established.
It's up and running if people want to get together and start organizing meetups and games in there. Yeah. Like if you're planning on attending, please find other BGBers to hang out with. That's what it's all about. Yeah, I'm so excited. Like, we're not ready to talk specifics, but like, we have a couple of panels lined up that I think will be really, really fun, and looking forward to that.
Absolutely. Okay, let's get into it. Board games that we think might deserve a second chance. I think you mentioned, Neelan, that this dovetailed nicely with your experience of Turing Machine.
Yeah, so my first game of Turing Machine, and to some extent this is partially, I would say, not helped by my teaching of the game. Much to Mark's point, it's a hard game to teach. And I think that there were definitely multiple people at the table who did not get it, to the extent that a player may have been saying, I'm telling you this is not solvable, or for me to be like, they would not put that in the game if it wasn't solvable. God.
You're going to tell me after the show who this is. Is this going to be I know?
It is.
Okay.
Yes, I absolutely will.
I can't wait.
But yes, it was just kind of this hilarious breakdown of the premise of the game, because it just wasn't being understood by all parties. And to the extent that like the whole game was just very quickly just like disintegrate. It was almost just like you just watch the whole thing dissolve under you. It's like, okay, well, this person got it, and it's like, well, okay, that's it. Let's put it back in the box and never talk about that ever again. And that's kind of what it felt like. So revisiting it, I knew that I was at that point confident that it deserved a second chance, and It went swimmingly every time after that, thankfully. But I think this is part and parcel like what some of the nature of this topic is, right? Which is to say, either the right and wrong people to play a game with at any given chance, or just like a game that doesn't necessarily sell itself best on the first impression, right?
Right. And I think I'll start off with a game that fits the criteria of game that doesn't necessarily sell itself on the first impression, but more importantly, in my case, I did not give it a good chance based on the way I played it. So the game I'm going to mention here is Gaia Project. So Gaia Project is a game that I mentioned in an earlier episode. I can't remember what the circumstances were, but something about like wanting to try it, a game that I'd never played that I wanted to play. So I was eager to play it. I've heard a lot of good things. I know it's one of your top 50 games, Neelan. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thereabouts. And I like its progenitor, Terra Mystica, and even the offshoot Clans of Caledonia. So I like those games. But in my eagerness to want to try it for the first time, I decided to, and I feel bad for them, recruit a couple of listeners and asked them to play it with me on BGA, on Board Game Arena async. So basically, Gaia Project itself is a long game. And again, I'm absolutely not averse to long games, but long games where you're taking your turns like with gaps in between and you're not at the table sort of like absorbing things. I learned it in advance, but then we tried to play it online on BGA, you know, the game that spanned probably 3 weeks. And every time it was my turn again, I just had to sort of like remember how things worked. Also, there's a lot of pieces to Gaia Project, and they don't really fit well on a single computer screen. And so it just was a really bad way to play it. I think the scores ended up being like, one of the listeners had a score of like, 70, and the other was like 68, and I was like 5. So like my goal at the end of the game was just to like not ruin their experience. But just a game that big, that complicated is not served by playing it, drip by drip over the course of 3 weeks. I don't think so. This was an obvious choice for me because I'm very confident that there's a really good game, but I just did not have a good impression. And I think that in general, BGA has sort of, for a lot of games, exposed aspects to them that I would not have gotten if I just played them once or twice in person, limited by getting people together in person for a board game that way. And I've enjoyed being able to play games on BGA and playing them one after the other, and sort of like taking different avenues and learning a lot about the game. So BGA can be a boon for a lot of games, but not for your first play of a really complicated game asynchronously. And for me, certainly not the case with Gaia Project. So looking forward to giving Gaia Project another go.
It's funny because you actually like exposed an element to this topic that I hadn't even considered when I was like coming up with my games, which is exactly that. Playing a game digitally for the first time, right, gives you a dramatically different impression. And, I had a similar experience with Space Station Phoenix, where having played that on BGA, it's not a heavy game to the extent that Gaia Project is a heavy game. But, it's a medium heavy Euro. It's fairly dry. It's on Board Game Arena. And my first impression coming away from BGA was, I don't know about that. And it's hard because like I feel like that impression would have been maybe different had I done it in person. To be perfectly honest, I didn't come away excited to play it in person. But then you contrast that with something like Get On Board, which is the new re-release of Let's Make a Bus Route. And my first impression, despite being negative on BGA, led me to feeling like, oh man, I'm excited to play this a second time in person. There are some games you could just tell don't work ideally on Board Game Arena.
And that was where I was at about 3 days into our play of Gaia Project. Like, oh, this was a noble thought, but this is not the way to get your first play of Gaia Project done.
It's interesting because I had actually had Gaia Project in a little bit of a digression maybe from the intent of the topic, which is to say that Gaia Project was my second chance at Terra Mystica, for lack of a better word. I had played Terra Mystica and didn't love it. I really wanted to, having heard the hype for a very long time, but came away a little bit cold. For some reason, like the idea of Gaia Project, and I've mentioned at length that sci-fi will often bring me back into a theme, even though it's almost irrelevant in the context of Gaia Project. But yeah, Gaia Project got me excited about what the sort of thing Terra Mystica is doing, to the extent that I appreciated Terra Mystica a lot more on subsequent plays, having since played Gaia Project. So I still maintain that Gaia Project is the better version of those games, but now with stuff like Age of Innovation, which is the new standalone expansion for Terra Mystica coming out soon, and Terra Nova, which is like a pared down version of Terra Mystica, those being on the horizon, I'm very excited for those because I'm now invested in the system by virtue of Gaia Project.
Right.
A game that definitely left a really bad impression for me in person, and a little bit of what I was alluding to when I was sort of talking about the danger of circumstance with some of these games, was Twilight Imperium. I had and I wanted to say this off the bat, all of the people I played this with were people I love, but this was a 6 to 8 hour game, where I very quickly realized I was doing really, really badly to the extent that I could not recover from. And then I just felt stuck in a game for that length of time. And I just came away thinking, I'm never going to want to play that ever again. There is something that's been brimming up in me recently, especially when 4th edition came out, and with the amount of like effusive praise I had been receiving, where I started to think like, maybe there's a world where I go back to Twilight Imperium. And I won't lie, Twilight Inscription maybe has also seeded something in me where it's like, I could see myself playing this again. To be clear, not the game itself, but everyone talking enthusiastically about Twilight Imperium based on my having played Twilight Inscription with them has me excited to play it again. I don't know how I would engineer that scenario, to be perfectly honest. I know that you had a good experience having played this at like a Strategicon in the past, right? So maybe that's the right thing. I just find the right people at a convention and be like, let's do this.
Yeah, I think my first play was Ruel from R&R, his stuff with Rado. So he was kind enough to teach it to me. And I think I was playing with 3 other beginners, so it must have been a 5-player game. I was fortunate in that I ended up winning the game, but more than that, it was like I was always in it. And I can see definitely if it had been my first time and I was being crushed, which could have easily have happened, that would have been a tough go. That might have made it that like a unrecoverable sort of situation. But I really enjoyed it. He was a great teacher. He had played it, I think, about a dozen times at that point, and he was very good about recommending a race for me, an alien race for me. Just very good about teaching it to beginners and playing with beginners and keeping things moving. So it was probably the best first play of Twilight Imperium a person could have. And it was also the 4th edition, so it was like the newest version. So I went into that game excited to play it, but sort of apprehensive, hearing all the like the negative aspects. I've heard a lot of good stuff about it, but I also heard like, oh, it takes forever. You know, it's like a turtling and all, like an old school in a lot of ways and not so great. And I can see that potentially being the case, but I had a really great experience with Twilight Imperium the first time playing it. So yeah, I'd be down to trying it out if you wanted to give it another go for sure. I'm going to go with another biggie here on my list, a game that I know a lot of people love, a game that I've played a couple times, should be right up my alley given that it is sort of reminiscent of coin games. But for me, Root is a game that I've played a couple times, has not worked for me, but the number of people who are just diehard fans of it, who have this as their sort of lifestyle game, all the expansions, all the asymmetry, everything about it are things that I should love, the hand management. I really need to give Root another try, even though, again, I've played it a couple times at this point. But everything, if you made a pros and cons list, all the aspects of it would be in the pro column. It just for some reason has not hit for me. Maybe listeners could give me a suggestion or give me like some sort of way to think about this or suggested play format that would make it work. I think maybe the fact that we've used the Vagabond in all the games that I played. I
was just going to say, because I think that advice often is don't play with the Vagabond.
Yeah, that's what I've sort of been picking up through reading about it and reading people's experiences with it. So maybe that was it. I don't remember the Vagabond being a huge negative to my experience, but the fact that everybody has to sort of hit the Vagabond to make sure that they don't win, and that might have been part of it. But yeah, just a game that I should love, and I feel like if I loved it, I'd get deep into it, but just has not hit me quite yet. So yeah, Root is the other game for me that I have to give it a second chance to.
What's interesting with Root is I sort of had the inverse of what I was talking about with Board Game Arena, where my second chance with Root was playing this digitally through the excellent app, by the way.
Maybe that should I try that?
Maybe it's a low barrier way to try it for what it's worth. It was pretty buggy on release, which didn't help. But I've got to be honest, I have not gotten past the barrier of like not really loving Root. Okay. I've had games that were better than others, and a lot of that really did just boil down to playing with expansion factions that just felt a lot more interesting. And I think that's part of the appeal of Root, right? Is just like, hey, this faction does something in a new and weird way. So that wading your way through that is part of the fun. But yeah, I would love to get there too. I've had a similar issue with that. Something I returned to recently was Rising Sun, and not in terms of the context of this episode, because Rising Sun is a game I adore, but it did get us all talking a lot about the rest of the Eric Lang games and got me thinking I probably owe Ankh not a second try, to be strictly speaking, because I've played Ankh 3 or 4 times, but those were all very close to the release, and I've kind of just held on to it. And I kind of want to give it a little bit of a resurgence and give it another chance to like break through. I had issues with the merge mechanic. I don't think it's like as profound as a lot of its detractors would imply, but I do think it does build something awkward into the strategy as the merge is approaching that doesn't quite feel connected to the rest of the game. But the thing that I've heard resoundingly since the release of Ankh is that it's an excellent 2-player game. And that kind of has got me excited to like really try break it out again and really dive deep into the 2-player aspect of it. Obviously that entirely dissolves the merge mechanic, but it becomes just much more of almost like a we at the time compared some of its systems to almost like Knizia-esque simplicity in terms of the board systems and the way that you like are dividing up the board into like these unique, distinct little areas. And I think that would shine at 2 players because it just becomes you splitting the board in a way that, you know, advantages you against one other player. The timing puzzle, the actions would become like very substantively different. It would be less chaotic than it felt at 3 or 4 players. So yeah, I can see what the benefits of reducing that player count to 2 would be. And I think that is maybe the thing that's kept Ankh in my collection in this time. Because based on my plays with it, I probably should have moved on with it by now. But
yeah. I enjoyed my few plays of Ankh. I'd heard that it's very good at 2, but I just, because the merge thing is such a big part of it, I don't know if I refuse to believe it or just struck me as weird, but yeah, I would be very interested to hear if you get around to playing it 2 players, how you like it. Because I've heard that quite a bit. So yeah, I'm assuming it's accurate. For my next game, I'm going to actually include a couple games here. I'm going to include, these are all games where I'm sure I'll like them, but they're just quite opaque. And I just don't feel like I've even skimmed the surface playing them the first time. So I'm going to say here, an Infamous Traffic, which is an early Cold War design, Panamax, and Maria. These are all sort of very intricate economy/war games that I've heard, again, very good things about, very critically beloved, and enjoyed my play of them. But in all cases, I just, at the end of it, just was like, what did I just do? I sort of walked away just feeling like I had not pierced any of the opacity of the games, especially Infamous Traffic, which is one of the most opaque games that I've played. But games where the difficulty in understanding both piqued my curiosity to play again, but also made me realize that it was going to be a bear to reintroduce to people who had not played it before. So this is a case where my impression of the games the first time were actually all positive, but just really hard to teach. We mentioned earlier in the episode both Turing Machine and Decrypto as games that are sort of tough to teach, but once you start getting going, once you sort of force people to just dive headfirst, they'll get it. These are games that are similar, but you can't really just dive headfirst in any of these games because they're just designed to be much heavier, much more complicated experiences. But all 3 of them are games that I just scraping the surface, I'm very intrigued to try again and really, really want to give another shot to. Maybe Shucks would be a place where we all sit down and we all, definitely dedicated to actually playing games where I would like to play them again. So that's Infamous Traffic, Panamax, and Maria. 3 complicated games that didn't really even grok at all after playing, but want to try again for sure.
Speaking of Shucks, actually, this is a much more recent game, but Dune Betrayal is one that I'm excited to take with me there because, it's the perfect sort of environment for like that style of social deduction game. So this is a social deduction game set in the world of Dune, designed by Don Eskridge, who is, the designer of The Resistance. So on paper, I'm like, this should be incredible. My first games of this went very poorly. And it's always very hard to gauge with social deduction whether that's just people that don't have any love for the genre or just not comfortable with that sort of style of game. And that's totally fine. But I've been so eager to just try break this out with more people and just see, is it the game or, is it just about finding the right people for it? I know that Kellen has had similarly iffy experiences with this, so I'm not entirely sure, but I'm not willing to give up on the social deduction game by Don Eskridge just yet. So I definitely want to try to get that one played at Chuck's.
Yeah, definitely. I mentioned earlier games that were benefited by playing them repeatedly on BGA, and also, again, obviously I mentioned Gaia Project, which wasn't. This is a game that I've played in person a couple times and then played on BGA and had my interested in it like fall off a cliff after playing on BGA, which is, to be clear, not the way things normally work. Normally BGA and repeated plays encourage me to play it more, but for whatever reason, playing Beyond the Sun on BGA, I just had really bad experiences playing it on BGA to the point where I was like, maybe I'm over this game. Maybe I'm completely over this game. Then I don't know, I think back to my earlier plays. I actually like look at the game, and I remember those early experiences where like the Tech Tree, this game, for those who don't know, has been described as like Tech Tree, the board game, where there is an area control aspect of it, but what's mostly about is teching up your own faction and trying to win by maximizing the efficiency of your techs, or just like teching out in a way that allows you to get ahead. And I really enjoyed my in-person plays, but for some reason, playing it on BGA has dampened my enthusiasm for it. But I feel like I should give it another try. This might be just a game that I enjoy more in person than digitally. I don't know what it is exactly, but Beyond the Sun is a game that I want to give another try to. And it may be a game where I just want to play it in person. I don't know. Maybe that's a thing that I've learned that maybe applies to some games in my life where I just do not want to play it online. Don't know.
I actually had a similar arc with this, having played it online, where I started to worry even. And again, it's so hard to gauge in the context of playing something asynchronously, but I started to worry that maybe the techs in Beyond the Sun all just felt a little bit too incremental to be very exciting in the long term in terms of like playing it multiple times. This is definitely outside of the scope of this question, but I do think Beyond the Sun is like one expansion away from being incredible. You know,
I could not agree more. Yeah.
Something I wanted to end on my end, which I think I'd be curious to ask you, Mark, is I have one game on my shelf that refuses to go away. And I keep wanting to give it second chances after second chances after second chance, which I don't think really count as second chances anymore. But that's XCOM, the board game. And, you know, like it's every single time I play XCOM, I've never to date played a game of XCOM that I would say has gone incredibly. But I always feel like, oh man, this is going to be so good next time I play this.
Right.
And full admission here, I almost sold XCOM this weekend. I was trying to sell XCOM, so it may not ever get that second chance. But man, something about it just keeps me wanting to come back to it. It's like the game I want to believe has that incredible game buried in there. Do you have anything like that you wanna believe?
A game that I have that I want to believe. Okay, let me take a quick look here.
Yeah.
You should bring XCOM to Shucks.
Sure. Yeah, you've never played it, right?
I have never played it.
Okay,
I've never played it.
Sweet.
And I want to play more than just the beginner round.
Totally.
Okay, let me see. One that I just believe, but one that I've played that I just believe. Let's see here. Quick gander. There must be.
You're just much more like, I would say, you'll cut a game.
Yeah. But I feel like there is a game that works in that respect. Because often I will get games like organized. Okay, these are the games I'm going to sell here at this convention. And I'll go through them. Okay, list it. And then I get to one and I'm like, I don't want to list it just
right.
yet. Like,
I mean, that was me for like many strategic cons up until now, and this was the first time, or maybe the second time, where I was just like, you know what,
I'm putting it out there. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm having a little difficulty figuring out exactly which games might apply to this, but as you said, like it may just be a result of me just being more ruthless with my collection. But part of me feels like Quantum is where, and I think with Quantum, it's a little bit accentuated by the fact that it's hard to get. So with most of my games, I'll just cut them because if I want them again, I'll just get them.
Right.
By some trading something, I'll be able to acquire them. I'm confident. But Quantum is hard to get. So Quantum is actually a game that I have sold and then traded for and then sold and traded for a couple of times.
Right.
But I have it now. And in this latest Strategicon, I didn't list it because I just thought, even though my couple of games of Quantum have not gone especially well, I don't really like it that much. Part of me feels like all these people want it, mostly because it's hard to find and because it's gained a little bit of a mythical part to it. But a lot of people do sing its praises as a game, and I just haven't hit that yet. I haven't found it to be the case for me yet. So that's maybe one of the games. I'm sure that I have more games that fit that criteria, but yeah, Quantum sort of jumps out at me as a game that I just feel like if I played it again, maybe like it's hanging in there. It's always on the fence as to whether or not I should get rid of it. And again, it has jumped over the fence because I have gotten rid of it a couple times. But this last time, I was, for whatever reason, more trigger shy than normal. So
it's funny that is a game that actually did have a very substantial second life for me on Board Game Arena. That implementation is excellent. If you've not played it there, then I mean, we should at the very least try that, see if it's something that is going to excite you.
Yeah, although, I mean, I just said that Beyond the Sun was a rare circumstance where a game playing on BGA hurt my opinion of a game rather than help it. But another game where that was the case was Quantum.
Okay.
I played Quantum a couple times on BGA and it was fine, but I had the same feeling like, it's not so great. But who knows? Maybe I'll give it another shot. So anyhow, I think that's going to do it for our episode today. Please go to boardgamebarrage.com/Discord and go to our podcast channel and tell us what games either that you think you should give a second chance to, maybe, throw out a couple of games and say, hey, should I get rid of these games or should I give them a second chance, and maybe hear what the listeners and the fellow folks on Discord have to say about them. Let us know what you thought of our choices. Maybe give me some sort of configuration for Root to give it another try. And just talk about your thoughts on giving games a second chance are. And maybe you think games shouldn't get a second chance. Maybe you think there's too many games to waste your time on bad ones, which is certainly something that I've thought and a fair thought in general. You can find us on all forms of social media. As always, we're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. You can email us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, which we love getting. And you can also support us via Patreon at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon. After this episode, as we do after almost every episode, we are going to record a little, what do we call that again?
Off the record.
Yes. We're going to record an off the record. I was going to say behind the curtains. We were going to record another off the record where the hosts on that episode will just chat about what we thought of the episode, more thoughts that couldn't fit on the podcast itself. We record a once a month bonus episode where we talk about non-board game related stuff, and we just throw in random stuff here and there. Whenever there's a math trade, I've taken to releasing a episode of MTT. This is my branding for it, which is Mark Talking Trades, where I go over my entire set of trades in that math trade, which is fun. People have enjoyed it for whatever reason. They are sick like I am. And just a whole bunch of other stuff that we have on there. So, yes, boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon is a great way to support the show. Thank you, as always, to Heart Society for our intro and outro music, What's on Your Mind, Kid, from the album Wake the Queens. And until next week, when we are hopefully reunited with the Red One himself, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Should we give Kellen a second chance?
He'll deserve it.
Goodbye. Oh, let's do a clap. 3, 2, 1. I just scared the dogs when I clapped. Okay, here we go.
You can make it if you try.
There you go. Wait, that's a cover, right? Isn't there like a song?
Yeah. That's an older song.
That's
an
older song, yeah.
For sure, they parodied.
Right. Parodied? I don't know if it was a parody. Was it a parody?
Well, I mean, the way it was depicted in the film was
homage. Which film?
Oh, wait, sorry, no, yes. Oh, I just realized what your actual question was. The Will Smith cover of that song,
right,
may or may not have been a cover, but it was most, I think, recognized for being parodied in Austin Powers.
Oh, okay. I do not remember Austin Powers. I will check all this before I put it in the episode so we don't sound like big, huge idiots. But I'm with you, at least in spirit. But in addition to just